really excited to have Robert Dillon as part of the Transformative Leadership Summit. He has been a longtime friend online, and someday I will get to meet him in person, and I can't wait because it's going to be awesome. And I'm excited to have him here today to talk about learning spaces. He's just finished a book and has another book coming out soon about learning spaces, and he's currently the director of Bright Bytes. And welcome, Robert. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Hey, thanks, Jethro. And it's great to be here and great to be a part of this bigger summit. I love this idea that we can learn asynchronously from quality people all over the country. And so if we're not modeling that, then I don't know how we can ask others to do that. So thanks for having me.
Well, speaking of models, you are a great model for that. And you've always been someone who has pushed learning into different areas. And so I'm excited to talk to you about that today, and especially about learning spaces, because I think that that is so important to what we're doing. And just this last year at my school, we got some treadmill desks and some standing desks and different seating arrangements for all of our classrooms. And it's really been exciting to see how the kids have gotten excited about that. So let's start there with furniture and talk about how furniture impacts kids' learning.
Yeah, well, let me back up just for a second, and then I'll go there. I've been thinking lately about the big levers of disruption in education, and I don't think there are too many. I think that we have a lot of doing the wrong stuff more right, as Will Richardson says. And when we really, really want to shake a system, we've got a few things. We've got the schedule. We've got grades. And I think you can put learning spaces in there as well. I think when people visually see school as something different, it can be a disruptive force. And so I think over my last 10 years as a middle school principal and CTO, and now as the director of the Bright Bytes Institute, I've been looking for those big levers. And so it's been nice for the last couple of years to play in the learning space arena. And I do think that furniture is a big part of what you talk about. We've been stuck, literally at times, stuck in desks in rows for way, way too long. And we know that, energy, productivity, the type of collaboration we're all begging for can't happen in that type of arena. And we actually know that one-to-one technology fails in that same sort of space. And so I think that this is a big lever also in making sure that technology integration is going to be maximized in schools as well.
And why do things fail in that space so much, Bob?
I think it fits in the other buckets, right? Like we always do what we've always known. Sometimes it's hard to build a sense of urgency around things like facilities and operations, and so I think that all of those things just create momentum more than anything else. I think when there's momentum one direction, systems naturally just want to keep going that direction.
Yeah, that's very true. And one of the things that I've seen in my experience is that if you change a space or change a schedule or change how you grade, then everybody starts talking about what that actually means. And if everything is the same as it always was, then it doesn't really mean anything, right? And so being able to have that conversation of what does it mean is very powerful and informative as you start these conversations.
Yeah, and one of the things we talk about in the book, The Space, is that this isn't about decorating classrooms, that it's not about Pinterest pretty classrooms, if you want to put it that way. It's truly about redefining the habitat in which kids build learning habits. And I think that's one of my kind of favorite buzzes out of the book, is that idea is that we're really looking at learning habitats. Kids are 8 hours a day in classrooms that either support their learning or inhibit their learning. And I think we have a responsibility to make those the best we can. Doesn't mean we need to pull up the money truck. Doesn't mean we need to back up everything and not be able to do something, but we need to do something there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that idea of money, it sounds very expensive to do anything with learning spaces as in a physical location because buildings are so expensive, furniture is so expensive. What are some easy, simple ways that we can start adjusting our learning spaces?
One of the first things I do when I talk about learning spaces is ask what we can take out. And there's something that doesn't cost, right? Is there an old bookshelf? Are there old blinds? Are there an extra table that inhibits the way we walk through the room? Is there a teacher desk we can remove? I mean, the list goes on. So I think before we talk about putting more things in, we really have to be critical about what we take out. I was in a classroom of a 42-year veteran teacher in Delaware. And I think in year 3, she told someone she liked frogs. So you know what happens, right? It becomes an episode of Hoarders. And we've got to do better than that for kids. Sometimes it's even about taking things off the walls that are laminated. It's about taking posters down. It's not about making it so primitive that it doesn't entice kids, but we ask why kids can't focus in the classroom, and then we put tons of stuff around them to stimulate them. So sometimes it's about addition through subtraction. But I also do think that there's some addition when it comes to writable spaces. I mean, if anybody's got a Lowe's or a Home Depot, they can create a 4x8 writable space for like $12. So if you weren't going to do anything else in your classroom, how could you twofold, threefold, fourfold the writable spaces that are available to kids? Because when kids start putting their ideas on the wall, it actually helps teach other kids. And so it just multiplies upon itself.
And why are those writable spaces that impactful?
Well, we give lip service a lot of times to student voice. And, when student voice through words or on walls, we're validating and celebrating what kids really believe. It's one thing to put it in a Google Doc. It's the next thing to put it up for the public to see it and to live with that. And so that's a big part. And one of the things we stress in our book is that classrooms need to become more of a show place where you're really looking at the concept of process as opposed to final product. We usually have a lot of bulletin boards with a lot of anchor papers, with a lot of student 100% with gold stars on them. But how can we create that writable space that shows learning process? And so we think that's a really, really important step forward. If you can really go from product to process when you kind of take a walk around the room with your eyes.
And I've seen some of that myself, and kids are sometimes hesitant to put up works in progress because they're not done or they're not good enough or whatever. And I've seen that helping empower them to do that, to be okay with that in certain situations, really makes a lot of sense. Can you talk about some of those times, especially where the process is valuable and should be shared?
Yeah, I was a high school English teacher, so value the writing process. We'll start right there, and being able to let kids know that draft 1 and draft 2 don't even come close to draft 50, right? And so that piece, we also don't want the same kids making the same mistakes. Like if kids can help each other not make the same mistakes, that's an important piece. And then, can we keep folks from really despising failure, if you want to call it that? Like to really believe that life is really in beta is a pretty cool idea if we can get that instilled in kids. And I can tell you, teachers still struggle with that too. We've been asking a lot of teachers to share into the open education resource marketplace. And I hear from teachers, my stuff's not that good. I don't know. Why would someone want my work? At the same time, we know bits and pieces of ideas actually spark fresh ideas for other folks. And so it's all of those things combined.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I saw in a math classroom this year was a math class that was for students who were struggling, weren't on grade level. And we saw incredible gains in their confidence and ability from being in that class, and had huge growth, and it was very exciting to see. But one of the things that I found totally fascinating was that the students did all of their work on a whiteboard every single day. All of it was done on a whiteboard. And at first I thought, well, how do the kids ever record what they've learned? How do they ever put that down and know that they've actually learned it. And through talking with the teacher, I learned that they have a little folder where they write down what they learned that day in this separate folder, but they look at that folder only briefly at the beginning of class and at the end of class and in the middle to do a little assessment to see how they're doing on their specific learning target. But the rest of the time, everything is on this whiteboard. And I thought about how powerful it is for those kids to erase their mistakes very easily and to erase their successes very easily as well. And to realize that on a whiteboard, they're both the same thing. They're writing on a whiteboard and it's gone as soon as you rub a cloth over it. And that to me was a powerful example of how that can really change a classroom. And she never made copies. She never had worksheets. It was always this whiteboard. And the gains of those kids, that's not the only thing she did, obviously, but that idea that it's not permanent and we're going to move on, it was really powerful.
Yeah, I love that idea. And just, each of those pieces that even your successes aren't permanent, right? Like we're moving on. We hear sports stars say all the time, like, hey, we're going to celebrate this one tonight, and then tomorrow we're going to get back after it. And so I don't think it's any different. And, think about math also. And, I think we have to teach kids that hard work is fun. Sometimes learning isn't fun, but hard work is fun. And there's a difference there. It's semantics in some way, but the other part is we always tell kids, learning's fun. And kids are like, no, it's not. It's hard work. So learning's hard work. Hard work is fun. And so we've got to break that down.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I like about this approach is that we're talking about really simple things that any school can do right now. And, a $12 purchase is not going to break the bank. And you can also just take a little paper page protector and put a white piece of paper in there and have something like that. Let's talk a little bit to the next level of what other kinds of things can we do to change our learning spaces. We've talked about taking things out, addition through subtraction, writable spaces. What else can we do?
Yeah, I think the book does a nice job of putting hacks in a few different ways. So if you want to put those in buckets, one is about collaboration. And one of the things we do there is being very purposeful about seating arrangement. That there are times where you want folks to be in stools, so they're leaning forward into a conversation. There's times when you want folks sitting back, so they're in a more reflective stance. And I think really thinking about the purpose of what you want for the different places in your classroom. Oftentimes we don't have a chance to think about that. We may say, oh, there's a station over there, there's a station over here. But being really thoughtful about that makes a difference. There's a school district in Virginia that says that any space they redesign has 3 different types of seating in it. They don't dictate what the type of seating are, but they say, hey, that's the amount of variance you need to really feel like something's different. So I would encourage teachers to think like that. Is it okay for kids to sit on the floor? Does that promote collaboration? Do we have kids sitting around a table that's a writable surface? Can we have kids standing up against whatever that looks like? There's a lot of easy hacks that go along with that. And then the other piece is hacks around creation. So if I was thinking about the purpose of my classroom, it would be about collaboration and creation. And I think that too often the purpose becomes how do we get kids more excited, or how do we keep them more engaged or less distracted? But I think you have to go to that second level of saying this is about collaboration and creation. And I think in the creation sense, you're talking about how do you put prototyping materials in the room? How do you put a pile of cardboard in a way? How do you create studio space where kids can work on things and truly create and step back and come back to it the next day? And in the book, we describe some places, ways to do that, as well as a lot of pictures. It's a very, very design-rich and picture-rich book, which I think, none of us really have that time to sit down with a 120-page book that's all text. And so we tried to help with that as well.
And, I don't have the skills to, I could never get feng shui in my house or my bedroom or my school office or classroom or anything like that. So I don't have the aesthetic awareness to be able to make some of those decisions. What do I do in that situation?
Yeah, and we talk about building a designer's mindset. I think that's an important piece. And we have to do a couple things. We have to get folks either seeing other spaces virtually or physically in those spaces. Too many teachers exist in two schools a year, the one where they teach and the one where their kids go to school. And that's a piece of the process. If you want to be a designer, you've got to either go look at classrooms or look at them virtually. And I think that one of the things I'll add to this podcast here will be a big array of photos of things that people have tried. And I think that'll be a nice value add for folks to be able to say, like, hey, here's 50 pictures. I'm bound to be able to grab some idea here that I can bring back. And the other piece is a lot of learning space design isn't scalable. It really is customizable. Every variable matters, and no variable is the same in any classroom. And so we want folks to feel like designers, have a sense of what design is, and then be able to bring that back in a real authentic way into their space.
Very cool. Adding those photos, getting those photos as part of the all access pass will be very awesome. And just being able to see from your experience what you've been able to capture will be good. As we're thinking about these things, what questions should we be asking ourselves about our current spaces? I'm in a 30-year-old building right now, and we just had a brand new, beautiful high school built right next to us. And the envy is pretty high. I'm not going to lie, because that's a beautiful building with a beautiful view of the ocean. And we hardly have any windows. And so my assistant principal, who's very insightful, has a way of looking at that where he says, the good news is we're in an old building, so we can do whatever we want, and we can repaint walls, and we can, do different things. So what kinds of questions should we be asking about redesigning our spaces?
Yeah, the first one might surprise you, but how can you use your hallways as learning spaces? I told teachers the other day that maybe they should just annex the hallway and take on piece of that. I was at a school in Alabama that had a maker station out there in the hallway. I've seen Lego boards in the hallway. So the first and foremost is that's a lot of square feet to not be used for learning. So how can we leverage that? The second piece is about sound for me. Some folks say 50% of all things that are said in class, either by students or a teacher, are lost because of the acoustics. And there's some things we can do there as we soften the room with softer seating, and when we're thoughtful about where we're standing in the room, and when we're thoughtful about just some of the things that make ambient noise in the room, things like refrigerators, things like, can't always impact HVAC and that sort of thing, but being at least thoughtful about that. And some of the amplification systems, if you were going to say, hey, it's really loud in here, we really do need a speaker where a teacher can be heard at a different level, things like that. And then also just the clutter. What 10 things could you remove next year that wouldn't impact learning? Those types of questions go a long way to making people think different. And then the question that always comes up for me is, I've got 28 desks in my room. My principal won't let me get rid of them. What do I do? They don't have another place to put them. I encourage folks to ask their parents, does anybody have a storage unit? Storage units in the United States, what, an $8 billion industry? Someone's bound to have some space. So take those out, put some 6-foot tables in, go to Walmart and buy some 6-foot tables and just see if it changes things. And if you don't like it, bring them back. It's fine. And one of the things that we can't get caught in the trap of is like, here's where we were last year, and then we're going to redesign it and it's done. Learning spaces can't be done. They can be ready for next year. I said make an alpha, but if you don't have a next 4 versions of your room, you're just as bad as when you started. So you can't go from 1 to 2. You have to go to 1 to 2 and then have a 3, a 4, a 5, and a 10 in the same school year.
And where does consistency come into that? We talk a lot about in education about how consistency is important, and I tried to find quotes about consistency, and all I found were consistency is a horrible thing that you should never worry about. And so go look up bradyquote.com and try finding something good about consistency. But that's what we crave in schools.
Yeah, how about consistent procedures and norms on how we operate in learning? I'm okay with that. But the idea that kids need the same looking type of space to exist in, whether they're in a social studies class or a math class or an art class, I don't know. I think that's folly, and it doesn't give justice to the fact that that subject in and of itself lends itself to a different type of space. And so I'm for consistency. I worked in a middle school for a long time. I get it, right? Like norms matter, but it doesn't have to be about the way we stack kids in a classroom.
Now, if we take this to another level and talk about designing a school from the ground up, what what would you say needs to stay the same as what we're currently doing, and what do we need to absolutely change if we're starting fresh?
Um, wow, and that's yeah. I think access to the outdoors came up right away, which is kind of interesting. I love that classrooms and some environments lend itself better than others, but love that classrooms have exit doors that kids can go outside and continue their learning beyond the school walls. I think it sends a powerful message. We also know that natural light does a lot. And so whatever we can do, and one of the beautiful things about LEED certified buildings is the natural light that's in those buildings. And I think that's a big deal. And we've had way, way too many stories of folks not bringing quality water to kids, right? Like let's get that locked down before we get too far down. Like we can't have lead pipes in our new buildings. And so, um, and then the other thing is common spaces, open learning spaces where kids can go and do project work, audio visual studios where kids can take green screens and their cameras and make create. I think those should be a big part of the process as well. So there's a few things.
Okay, I think that's a good start to get us thinking, and some of us may be able to do some of those things with what we currently have, which is why I asked that question, to be able to say, if we could design from the ground up, what would we change? But really, what can you do with your current situation? So, in let's say I'm a principal and I've got a classroom that is not being utilized fully this year, where would you suggest I start to make that a usable space for next year?
Yeah, first I would get a group of students in that room. We do such a poor job in education of designing for kids and not with kids. I would take a group of students in there and begin to vision. Um, and we oftentimes solve for problems that really aren't kid problems. And so, how can we get kids in there and start asking them the right questions? Like, what makes you comfortable learning? What do things differ in the morning and the afternoon? How do you hear best? What about your fellow students? So, asking students a ton of those questions is a part of that. The second part is if you're going to buy some things and you've gotten to that part, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, don't buy it all at once. We recommend like a 30-40-30 process. So buy 30% of maybe what you think could be right based on student feedback. Let students start to interact with that. Be a sociologist of the room. Learn what really works, learn what doesn't, and then buy the next 40%. And then you'll have almost the mothership of everything in there. And then, 6 months, a year later, the next new thing is going to come out or something that can really supplement what you're doing. Then you have a little bit of cash in the back to do that. I think sometimes there's such an urgency to say, we have this pool of money, we need to spend it all today. And I love the idea of when universities don't put sidewalks in and they let kids walk wherever. And then wherever they wear things down, they put sidewalks. Same sort of theory. I turn that over to the kids. And I think it's a magical experience when you're able to pull it off. We were able to do that in the Afton School District with 6 or 7 spaces over the last 2 years, which was kind of the genesis of the book, was that we were really doing the stuff. We were really making a difference, and we were really seeing cultures change, and we wanted to make sure we shared that with everyone.
Yeah, we did something similar with that at our school with those treadmill desks that I was talking about, and with the standing desks, and with the wobbly stool things. And what we did essentially was we got a bunch first and put them in different spaces, saw that kids were enjoying them, and then bought some more. And then we still have an opportunity to buy some more for next year so that we can, increase the different things that are in there. One of the frustrations that we've had is that people mistakenly believe that because it's there, then the kids have free access to it whenever and however. Can you talk a little bit about procedures and systems to put in place to help teachers know how to deal with those things?
Yeah, learning spaces are not going to help teachers that have poor classroom management. Just like if you bring one to one into a school, both of those things amplify excellent teaching and expose mediocre teaching. And so there is a fear with like, is this going to, break the way I've done things before? But I think kids are pretty respectful. We dropped a bunch of high school kids off in a library that was brand new with couches and wobbly stools, and we, sure we had to remind kids, but no different than we did with the wooden chairs in the library about don't lean back in them. We really don't see a huge amount of breakage or a huge amount of abuse, but I think teachers that can just be honest with their students. And we're not doing that today, just like we do with our computers where we say close the lids, whatever that is. We're not saying that 24 hours of it being there means 24-hour access. And just being honest about that's important.
Yeah, I've learned a ton from this conversation with you, and one of the things that you said was getting kids to talk about their vision of the space. And part of this summit is Amy Fast talking about how she got all of her students at her school to give feedback on how they felt about school, and using those same strategies that she talks about, I think would be really good for the spaces. What parting piece of advice do you have for principals who want to take this to the next level in addition to buying your book? Because that's a given. There's a link down below. You got to make sure you get that.
I think not going slow, but with a sense of urgency. Oftentimes we hear go slow, go slow, go slow. I think there has to be a sense of urgency. I think that you need to break the mental model of what folks think about school. And so if that's one space in your school, if that's a library, if that's an old computer lab, if it's an unused classroom, really go in there and be disruptive. Make it very different. And the rest of your classrooms won't be that different, but that's okay. Because just like a rubber band, you've got to stretch people out pretty far to get them to move. And so I would encourage principals to do that. And the second would be to say yes a lot. There would be a lot of teacher ideas, a lot of small teacher ideas along the way that if you can say yes to during that process, that you're going to have all these little micro changes happening too. So just remember that culture of yes, saying yes, and just kind of leaning into being the lever that it is, and let it be disruptive for your school.
Awesome. That's great advice. Thank you so much for your time, Bob. And it's been awesome talking to you, as it always is. You're incredible. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jethro. It's been great, and have a great vacation the rest of the summer.
Thank you.